All right. Diving into some ancient wisdom today with this text, Exhortation to the Monks. For a guide written for monks way back in the 5th century, it's amazing how relevant some of the stuff still feels.
It really is. I mean, it's all about monastic life, sure, but when you get down to it, it's tackling these universal things,
Yeah,
finding purpose, figuring out how to live ethically, connecting to something bigger than ourselves. That's something we're all grappling with, monastery or no monastery.
yeah, totally. And the text doesn't shy away from pushing for growth either. Like it emphasizes striving for the highest discipline, which I found really interesting. This whole idea of pushing ourselves, reaching for something more fulfilling. It's like that desire for personal growth, it's not limited to ancient monks, right?
No, not at all. It's like the text is encouraging us to build our own inner monastery, this space for introspection and like deliberate living. Doesn't matter what your external situation is. And it doesn't beat around the bush either. Right from the start, it's urging these monks to strive for perfection.
It jumps right in. There's that line that really stood out to me, something like the first cradles, so to speak, of infants in the knowledge of God, so vivid. It really paints this picture of starting a journey, this process of growth and understanding. You're not just settling for some basic acceptance of faith.
No way. The text actually warns against the promiscuous faith of the common people. It's pushing you to go deeper, to question things, really wrestle with what you believe.
It's a deep dive in and of itself. Forget blind acceptance. This is about seeking something richer, a more profound understanding. So we've talked about these big ideas the text wrestles with, but it doesn't stop there, does it? It gets really practical, really specific about how to actually live a more meaningful life.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's where these practices come in. Abstinence, fasting, constant prayer, reading, silence. Now, those might seem a little intense at first glance, maybe even a bit outdated.
Like something you'd read about in a history book, not something you'd actually do.
Right, exactly. But, and here's what I find so interesting, when you reframe these practices in a modern context, they become these tools, these really powerful tools for self-discovery and growth.
Okay, I like that. So like take fasting, for example. It's not just about, not eating. It's about understanding this deeper thing about desire itself.
That's it. We live in a world of instant gratification. So what happens when we intentionally hold back, deny ourselves something, even for a little bit?
We create this space, right, between the craving and actually giving in.
Exactly. And in that space, that's where the insight is. We start to see how strong a hold those desires have over us, and that self-awareness, that ability to just observe those patterns, that's powerful stuff.
It's like we're so used to being on autopilot, just reacting. But this is about hitting pause, choosing how and when we respond.
Yes, precisely. And that kind of self-mastery, it can apply to everything. Our relationship with technology, how we react to our emotions, you name it.
It's less about deprivation then, more about understanding ourselves in a deeper way.
You got it. And this idea of conscious engagement, it applies to how the text talks about prayer too.
Constant prayer, that's one I was wondering about. What did that even look like back then? It's not like they were tweeting out a prayer every 5 minutes.
Different world back then, for sure.
Yeah.
But think about it. What if it's about cultivating this constant awareness, this connection to something bigger than ourselves?
Like carrying that sense of mindfulness with you throughout the day, instead of getting so caught up in everything that we lose sight of what matters.
Yeah, exactly. And that, that ties in with the silence piece too, which in our world almost feels radical, doesn't it?
It really does. But, even if it's just a few minutes each day, disconnecting from all the noise, just being present, so important.
Absolutely. Silence lets us create that space to just be with our thoughts, process our experiences, connect with that stillness inside of us.
It's like hitting the reset button on your mind.
Yeah. It's about finding clarity, having that space for reflection. And that stillness, it ripples out. It changes how we engage with the world.
And then there's reading, but again, not talking about scrolling through headlines or anything like that.
Right, right. The text is talking about deep engagement. Scripture, things that challenge you, make you think critically. But we could apply that same idea to how we learn today, the information we choose to take in.
It makes you think about the difference between just consuming information and actually engaging with it, really wrestling with ideas and being willing to let them change you.
It's about being discerning, right? Choosing stuff that nourishes your mind, helps you grow, instead of just adding to the noise.
That feels more important than ever today with just how much information is out there. It's easy to get caught up in like our own personal growth, right? But this text, it doesn't let us off the hook when it comes to how we treat other people.
Oh, no, not at all. It's not enough to just do all this inner work in isolation. The text is really big on this how that inner work translates into being more ethical, more compassionate out in the world.
Walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Exactly. And what I love is it gives such practical advice, even all these centuries later. Like, how do we actually do that? How do we actually live that way?
Yeah. And some
Right.
of it is so simple, but it just hits you. Like there's this one line, replace quarrels with love, temper anger with patience. I mean, wow.
Right. It really makes you think about how you approach conflict. Like, instead of getting all caught up in being right, proving your point, what if it was about really trying to understand the other person, you know, connect with them?
Choosing compassion over your own ego, even when it's hard.
Exactly. Which can be a tall order sometimes. And there's that other line, every idle word is subject to judgment. That one really makes you pause, huh?
It does, especially these days. It makes you think about social media, how easy it is to just like fire off a comment without really thinking about
Oh, yeah, and so true. Words have weight, even when we don't mean for them to. And this actually ties back to what you were saying about compassion, because the text talks about this too, how important it is to have compassion for those outside the monastery walls, people living totally different lives.
it. Right. There's that line about not harshly judging people who are still tied to worldly affairs. I feel like that's something we all need to hear sometimes.
It is. It's that reminder to lead with empathy, you know? Everyone's on their own journey, dealing with their own stuff. We don't always know what's going on in other people's lives.
Exactly. So, okay, we started with this ancient guide for monks, and somehow we ended up with all these insights that feel so relevant to our lives today, even if we're not living in a monastery.
It's amazing, isn't it? It just shows you how powerful these timeless principles can be. Self-discovery, ethics, searching for something bigger than ourselves, those are universal.
No matter what century you're living in, sometimes looking back can be the best way to move forward.
Absolutely. And hopefully this deep dive has given our listeners some food for thought, maybe even some inspiration as they navigate their own paths.
To a more meaningful and fulfilling life. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.